I would like to give the floor to the OECD Deputy Secretary General, Mr. Masamichi Kono, who will provide introductory remarks on the OECD work on the transition to net zero.
Dear ministers, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, I'm truly honored to open this seminar on accelerating the race to net zero in Central Asia. Today's event, organized by the OECD, is one in a series of regional exchanges in response to the climate urgency. It will allow us to take stock and deepen the exchange on the relevant challenges and opportunities for Central Asian countries. The seminar is also part of the new regional cooperation project on sustainable infrastructure for low carbon development in Central Asia. I would like to thank the German government, other OECD member countries and partner organizations for their support and for entrusting the OECD with this important project. I would also like to thank our colleagues at the OECD for working hard to make this event happen. Now, we meet at a decisive moment ahead of COP26. Most OECD and several non-OECD countries have announced goals to achieve net zero emissions by mid-century. The challenge now is to design the plans and the roadmaps on how to turn those goals into concrete actions on the ground. The OECD is undertaking a number of initiatives to support countries to achieve both their national climate objectives and the collective efforts under the Paris Agreement. And drawing on the multidisciplinary power of the OECD, the ongoing OECD-wide horizontal project on climate and economic resilience aims to make a substantial contribution in mainstreaming climate change across policymaking and in closing the gap between long-term climate ambitions and policy actions in the near term. This project also actually encompasses the new OECD International Program for Action on Climate, IPAC for short, which allows to monitor climate policy performance and support participating countries' actions to achieve the objectives of the Paris Agreement. Now, while the mid-century target for achieving net zero may seem still a bit far away, investment decisions being made today will determine whether net zero is achievable at country and global levels, especially in energy, transport, and industrial systems involving long-lived infrastructure. Central Asia has suffered from decades of chronic underinvestment in infrastructure, and the need to prevent further environmental damages, such as water stress and biodiversity loss, is even more acute, as these challenges are already being amplified by climate change. It is projected that Central Asia will be particularly hard hit by climate change. For instance, the speed of temperature rise is more than twice the global average. While such trends are worrying, we also see a positive momentum in the region. Central Asian countries are gearing up really to address climate change, with several encouraging recent developments. And I would just like to raise a few examples. Kazakhstan has set a new ambitious objective to increase the proportion of renewables in the country's energy mix. It has also announced its intention to achieve net zero by 2060 and is expected to publish its long-term low-emission development strategy anytime soon. Uzbekistan has announced the low-carbon energy strategy, and Kyrgyzstan has reinforced its national policy framework for the transition to a more inclusive green economy. These green policies, however, cannot exist in isolation. They must crowd in private sector funds to boost green technologies and low carbon investment in Central Asia. While there has been some success with feed-in tariffs and competitive auctioning for renewables in some countries, incentives to attract international investors in this important region should be further strengthened. So, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Central Asia is strategically located to become a hub for energy trade between East Asia and Europe. The region also has substantial untapped solar and wind potentials, as well as the need to meet rapidly growing electricity demand. These represent both opportunities and challenges for Central Asia on its path towards achieving net zero in ways that are economically sound and socially inclusive. The OECD stands ready to continue supporting our partners in Central Asia on this journey. It will provide governments and other stakeholders with best practices, standards, tools, and practical guidance on how to foster transparent and responsive decision-making in infrastructure investment for low carbon development. So thank you very much, and I wish you a fruitful and interesting discussion.
Thank you so much, Deputy Secretary General. And then before we begin our first panel discussion, I'm happy to invite my colleague, Kumi Kitamori, who heads the Green Growth and Global Relations Division in the OECD's Environment Directorate, to provide an overview regarding the importance of developing long-term low emissions development strategies, which the Paris Agreement, of course, encourages all countries to develop, and which a number of Central Asian countries have been very actively working on. Kumi, please.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, dear Vice Ministers, Ambassadors, colleagues. I'm very pleased to have this opportunity today to discuss progress and opportunities and challenges for a net zero transition. We all know that the policy reforms and investment made today are very important to shift towards a low carbon economy, but we also need to make sure that these short-term actions now are compatible with the long-term vision to achieve a net zero by mid-century. So in this context, long-term low emission development strategy, or I will just abbreviate LEDS for the rest of my presentation, it's an important compass to guide countries on their journey on decarbonization pathway over the coming decades. My presentation will focus on lessons learned from the development of LEDS and their implementation in OECD countries, and some recommendations for Central Asia. Next slide, please. So as mentioned already, Article 4 of the Paris Agreement states that all parties should strive to formulate and communicate long-term low greenhouse gas emission development strategies. So far to date, some 32 countries have submitted LEDS to the UN FCCC. OECD's recent cross-country analysis of the development and also the implementation of LEDS in OECD countries outlines 5 clusters or 5 good areas of good practices, as you see on the slide. First, on vision and targets. Countries state clear ambition to embark on a low carbon development strategy path. Some have outlined visions on both climate mitigation and economic development or wider social goals. And also high-level political buy-in on this vision for the country is very critical. As for targets, most countries have set reduction targets in terms of percentage compared to a base year, while a small minority of the countries have set an absolute target in terms of metric tons of CO2 equivalent. Some have even included qualitative targets for adaptation as part of their LEDS. Second, on institutional setup and legal framework, in some countries such as Mexico and France, the law mandated the creation of a LED, conferring a legal status on the strategy, and once completed, making the emission reduction targets legally binding, as is the case in the United Kingdom, the UK. As for sectoral coverage and greenhouse gas targets, most countries have modeled multi-sector approaches for the decarbonization of the entire economy, or in some cases with a link to concrete sectoral strategies for key sectors such as energy. Now, resources and finance is a challenge. Most early LEDs did not formally discuss the financing of their preparation and implementation, either in terms of national budget allocation or climate finance for the investment needed, which is done later or separately from the LEDs elaboration exercise. More recently experienced, for example, in Kazakhstan, it's good to see that investment needs are analyzed as part of the elaboration of the LEDs itself. Now, translating the strategy into bylaws and concrete instruments is another decisive step in the implementation. Now, aligning sectoral development and investment plans, especially in energy, transport, and industry with the LEDs, and advancing the policy reforms to boost private investment will be critical, as public finance alone will not be able to cover the large investment needs for decarbonization. And developing a LEDs is not a one-time exercise. It has to be an iterative and inclusive process of periodic revisions over the coming years to take account of the new technological development as well as socioeconomic changes. Now, I'm looking forward to the next session in this seminar today. You will hear from the countries on their efforts to develop NEDs or similar decarbonization or green economy strategies. And of course, OECD, we stand ready to support them in close cooperation with other active partners in this area. Next slide, please. Now, beyond all this, what to do next? My microphone. The LEDs cannot exist in isolation. The low carbon transition is a structural transformation that calls for a rethink in economic, sectoral, and social policies so that they are all aligned with the long-term decarbonization goals. This also needs to be part of structural reforms to shift to a more diversified and modernized and liberalized economy that is more attractive for private investors. We know that some of the countries in Central Asia are already making good progress with such reforms, but this decarbonization and net zero goals make it imperative to speed up these reforms and then ensure that they are bolder, faster, and more coherent. And first and foremost on fiscal policies. Now, carbon pricing is still globally too low, but things are expected to change, reflecting the expectation in the coming days, and as we see already now, of the tightening of climate policies in different countries. There is much discussion today on international convergence on carbon pricing and how that might be achieved. And OECD has been an active policy advisor in this area. Now, apart from taxes, on the subsidy side, fossil fuel subsidies have been declared by G20 as being fiscally wasteful and environmentally harmful. But we still see countries in Central Asia where such subsidies as share of GDP are still quite high, with government spending more on this than on education. Fossil fuel subsidies remain an important deterrent for private investors in low carbon infrastructure. Drawing on OECD work in this area, we stand ready to support countries on raising awareness and gaining public support for such reforms. Another area is competition policy and investment climate in general. Removing investment barriers to encourage investment in low carbon solutions and to facilitate the reallocation of resources across the economy is what's ultimately needed for the structural adjustment for decarbonization. Much more needs to be done in the area of governance of SOE, state-owned enterprises, whose reforms underpin productivity growth, new job opportunity, and green technology adoption. OECD has been supporting countries with SOE reforms, for example, in Ukraine and possibly in the near future, Kazakhstan. And efforts to improve the overall legal environment for private investors, both domestic and international, need to be pursued, notably in areas of dispute settlement, contract enforcement, and strengthened judicial independence, legal protection from direct expropriation, or visa policy for foreign managers and experts to support upskilling of local staff. Now, in the area of innovation and skills, much progress will hang on the efforts, the sustained efforts to accelerate the uptake of best available techniques for energy efficiency and low carbon technologies. They are already available or in the process of further development and deployment, and costs are expected to come down further from learning by doing. This can be spurred by the right enabling policies, such as support to public-private partnerships on key technologies in power generation, storage, carbon capture, transport, and heavy industry, increasing internationalization of higher education institutions, and matching skills development with industry demand. And another area is improving the governance of science, technology, and innovation by coordinating efforts amongst ministries and other actors, and enhancing capacity of technology transfer offices. And finally, last but not least, it's important to ensure a just transition for workers. Decarbonization, as we know, means that regions that depend on extractive industries will face the challenges of economic diversification and redeployment and reskilling of workers in carbon-intensive sectors that will be phased out. OECD has been working with many countries and regions on best practices in addressing such economic and social transitions, notably in coal regions, in OECD as well as non-OECD countries. Our work on mining regions and cities provide a platform for sharing lessons among countries on how to respond to these challenges and opportunities. So in my conclusion, I would just like to end with saying that the decarbonization is a huge challenge for all countries, not just for countries in Central Asia. But if done right, the economy-wide transition to net zero can create new economic, commercial, and employment opportunities. And we at the OECD, we stand ready to support countries in Central Asia on this journey, working together with development partners who are also active in this area in Central Asia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kumi. We now turn to hear from the countries of Central Asia. Little bit of a rejigging of the order on your agendas for technical reasons, but we will hear from them all. Значит, прежде всего, я бы хотел передать слово.
First of all, I would like to give the floor to first Vice Minister of Economic Development and Trade of Tajikistan, my old friend, Mr. Asherboy Salihzoda. Mr. Salihzoda, please, the floor is yours. Mr. Salihzoda, are you with us?
He was here. Вам нужно вот включить микрофон. Я его вижу. Пожалуйста. Отлично. Слышим вас.
Could you please turn on your mic? Can you hear me? Can you hear me well?
Спасибо, уважаемые коллеги.
Thank you, dear colleagues, dear participants of today's webinar. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of today's webinar for the excellent organization of this event and for choosing the topic important not only for Central Asia, but also globally. The topic has been growing even more topical in recent years, and countries have been seeking new ways and modalities of achieving sustainable growth, which would also be aligned with environmental sustainability and social justice requirements. I would like to mention that Tajikistan has already adopted the medium-term sustainable development program for 2021-2025 as the second phase of the national development strategy until 2030. And one of the key differences of the medium-term development program versus the previous programs is the challenge of implementing the green economy principle in the Republic of Tajikistan. And implementation of the green economy principles has been identified as a new source of sustainable development and growth. The Republic of Tajikistan also has major renewable energy resources. 98% of electricity is generated by hydropower plants. In line with the green economy principles, Tajikistan has started constructing solar power plants, and one of such solar power plants has been built in Bujak region of the Republic of Tajikistan. Therefore, there are about 13,000 glaciers and thousands of rivers across Tajikistan, which account for about 60% of water resources generated in Central Asia. And availability of these water resources, of course, underpin the development of green economy. The medium-term development program of the Republic of Tajikistan for 2021 to 2025, Tajikistan's transition to green economy and building the capacity of public institutions in the implementation of those principles is a priority. Therefore, it should be mentioned that achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, namely the goal of availability of clean and affordable energy set forth in the 2030 Agenda and Sustainable Development Program, set concrete goals and targets in relation to the promotion of green economy. Therefore, in order to implement these instruments and priorities, the Ministry of Economic Development and Trade of Tajikistan has been appointed as an authorized body for coordination and of policy in the area of green economy development in Tajikistan. To this end, the Green Economy Department was set up within the ministry, and currently the ministry has prepared a draft proposal regarding the development of the national domestic environment for green economy in the Republic of Tajikistan. And it has also been engaged with development partners in drafting national documents in the area, and first and foremost the green economy development strategy in the Republic of Tajikistan. Preparatory work is currently underway, and hopefully with the assistance of development partners, we will draft this green economy development strategy of the Republic of Tajikistan in the near future. And this strategy will set out key objectives and activities related to the implementation of the green economy principles in the Republic of Tajikistan. It is the first step in operationalizing the goals set in this domain. Implementation of this future green economy strategy will also include strengthening the legal framework for the green economy in the Republic, and will also include the coordination and monitoring of implementation of the green economy programs, as well as establishment of some institutions to implement the green economy principles. And of course, it should be mentioned, and the previous speakers has also mentioned the objective of cooperation and coordination of efforts among the Central Asia countries as well as in the area of innovation, as well as building the institutional capacity and cooperation in relation to climate change adaptation and greenhouse gas emissions reduction. I hope that with the establishment of this platform within the framework of the OECD, the Central Asia countries will coordinate their efforts and cooperate in this area in the future. Certainly, only meaningful cooperation with our development partners can help implement our joint net zero plans, and we hope that this webinar creates exactly such a platform for developing cooperation in relation to the green economy. Thank you very much, Mr. Solikzoda. It is always a pleasure to hear your statements at our events. And now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Ilhom Narkulov, First Deputy Minister of Economic Development and Poverty Reduction of Uzbekistan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thompson. If you allow me,
good afternoon.
If it's not a problem, if we have a translation in place.
We have interpretation both ways, whichever language, please.
Okay. So now, first of all, I want to thank the organizers of today's webinar. It's very important. I'm especially OECD and the German government and all the European partners, and I want to thank my colleagues from Central Asian countries who have joined this webinar, and they're also contributing with their vision, inputs, and their view regarding the further development of the region in the context of transition to green growth model. First of all, I want to give a kind of a brief insight what we are currently doing and what sort of approach we are having in place. I have to note that transition to green growth model hasn't become a kind of something that you are going to tell, you are going to sound like better, or you are going to be a trendy. This is a necessity of today. So the pandemic has shown, and we have acknowledged that moving towards green development is very important. There are some few underlying points here, especially in the context of Uzbekistan. We are setting up an ambitious goal for next 5 years towards the economic development, achieving a sustainable and high level of economic growth. But we cannot consider this level of growth and making it inclusive and also making it resilient without transitioning to green growth. First factor is that supporting the energy sufficiency or providing the energy sufficiency in the economy. This is very important, especially in the context of Uzbekistan. Our estimations are showing that the energy level of growth, like 6 to 7% annually, that requires during the next 5 years to increase the energy production, also taking into account the current level of deficiency by 1.5 times. So one and a half times we have to increase the energy generation. And at the same time, we see that there is like a natural resource are decreasing. The only source is what they have to do is we have to implement renewable energy. So in this context, we all, even if you don't take into account the climate change issues, but climate change is very important. So renewable energy is the only way that takes out us, this difficult situation. So in this regard, we already started to take practical steps. Probably you have already heard that we launched a new station that generates energy from solar panels. It's in Navai region, and recently we announced successfully tender for the project that generates energy from the wind turbines. And we have in our pipeline like 9 and more projects in order to implement in the next 2 or 3 years. Another issue is in the context of Uzbekistan is to achieving the energy efficiency. Unfortunately, we are currently in a situation where energy usage for creating 1 unit of GDP is relatively higher compared to other countries, especially developed countries. So this is also important in the context of supporting and achieving the competitiveness in the economy. This is very important. Another issue is, which is relevant with using the land and water resource in agriculture sphere is food security and price stability. We are all seeing today that how fragile we are and how we are interdependent, but at the same time, Uzbekistan population is increasing by 1.5 to 2% annually, and also we consider the growth of the income of population. So we see that in the nearest future, or even in the mid to long-term perspective, there will be a high demand for food products. But at the same time, we have a limited resource of land and limited resource of water, especially water is becoming also a kind of a problem in the context of the global climate change, and it's becoming less and less. So that requires us to implement innovative technologies and innovative approach to use the existing resource more efficiently in order to create more product and to increase the production. This is also a necessity of today, and we can only do it by transitioning to green growth and green technologies. The other issue is that we are actively implementing the program of urbanization and developing the cities, and green urban development and moving to green transportation is also on the agenda of our development program. This is also important. We already, the government has already adopted a new degree, and we are getting prepared to set up electric cars by 2026. So for that, we started to work now in order to establish necessary conditions. So we can talk a lot, and so as I mentioned, today's platform is very important, and achieving the good results, very good results, is very difficult in the context of one country. There should be a very good regional cooperation, especially in the energy sector and using the water resource. And so I hope that this platform will create this condition and will enable us to communicate and to take like a consistent action together with colleagues with the countries in the region. For doing so, we have a strategy which was adopted in 2019, but we are revising our strategic framework, and we are with the support of our development partners. So the strategy, today we have another roundtable for discussing this strategic framework. And Ministry of Economic Development and Poverty Reduction has revised its structure. So we also, as my colleague from Tajikistan mentioned, we also revised our structure, and there is a new block at the ministry which will be responsible for development of the green economy, and also at the same time will be involved in the process of IT and innovative technologies. So we consider that switching to a green growth model will be will go hand in hand with IT and innovative technologies. So we stay ready for cooperation and better communication. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. And now we turn to hear from Kazakhstan. a country which is finalizing its low carbon development strategy or concept. And I'm happy to pass the floor to Vice Minister of National Economy, Mr. Alibek Kwantirov.
Thank you. Thank you for such good presentations and very good organization of this event. And dear Mr. Connor, dear Mr. Thompson, dear participants of this webinar, the transition to carbon neutrality is becoming one of the main strategic goals for most countries, including Kazakhstan. And to achieve that, it's necessary to accelerate the transition to renewable energy sources and ensure the decarbonization of our economies. As has already been mentioned by Mr. Connor, we have set a goal to decarbonize our economy by 2060. It was announced by our president at the Climate Ambition Summit 2020. And last year, we adopted an updated National Development Plan until 2025. And one of the principles of which is greening of the economy and environmental protection. Since July 1st this year, the new environmental code of the country entered into force, and the main purpose of that is to define the legal foundations, tasks, principles, and mechanisms for implementing state environmental policy. The concept of transition towards greener economy includes lowering energy intensity of GDP by 50% and calculating the proportion of renewable energy sources to 50% by 2050. And in the near future, it's planned to increase these indicators to 15% by 2030. In recent years, significant steps have been taken to improve investment climate in the renewable energy sector, and at the initial stage, a system of fixed tariffs and a single buyer were introduced, which allowed us to launch the renewable energy market in Kazakhstan. Later, the mechanism of electronic auctions was introduced that helped to achieve significant tariff reductions, making the process of their formation as transparent as possible. These measures made it possible to achieve a significant production increase of renewable energy, the proportion of which was 3% in 2020, and total capacity was 1.6 thousand megawatts. In the near future, we plan to adopt an ambitious long-term strategy, the doctrine of achieving carbon neutrality of the Republic of Kazakhstan. The German Society for International Cooperation, GIZ, and the United Nations Development Programme are taking part in the development of this doctrine. In general, the document describes the potential for reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the country, specifies the amount of investment needed to reduce emissions from the main sectors of the economy, as well as the introduction of new technologies. The doctrine reveals the main challenges that Kazakhstan will inevitably face in the transition to lower carbon economy. So in particular, in the coal industry, for example, it's planned to replace coal with natural gas and renewable energy sources in the production of electricity. Kazakhstan is one of the world's largest coal producers. About 110 million tons of coal are produced annually, including about 30 million of tons that are being exported. In addition, 58 million tons are sent to energy-producing enterprises, which generate over 80% of electricity. Taking into account that about 30,000 people work in the coal industry today, a sharp decline in coal consumption and export associated with the global trend of switching to renewable energy sources will lead to job cuts. And we should also take these risks into account. And in general, carbon neutrality issue is quite a sensitive one. And Kazakhstan's economy, which is heavily dependent on the export of hydrocarbons, really needs to adapt. In this regard, the country's coal companies need to review their development strategies towards obtaining synthetic liquid and gaseous fuels from coal. This will help to neutralize the negative social aspect of the issue and save some jobs. Adapting to the energy transition will require global changes. The country may face economic and social difficulties due to the phase out of coal and the loss of jobs. We understand that planning and transition to green growth should include all issues, in particular social, gender, employment and education of the population, the future development of new professions and skills, as well as people with special needs. At the same time, it's important not only to provide jobs, but also to develop access to education and the development of social protection measures. Achieving carbon neutrality for Kazakhstan is a difficult but achievable goal. Targeting this goal will reduce emissions by more than 9 billion tons of carbon dioxide for the entire period up to 2060 and increase the GDP of the country by 2060 twice as much as predicted, to more than $500 billion. These measures will require a significant investment in the amount of more than $600 billion until 2060. Therefore, the issue of increasing the investment attractiveness of the alternative energy industry in Kazakhstan is a key one. We know the reality and we are at the beginning of this path. This work requires a long-term approach, and now we're beginning to better prepare for our overcoming risks and managing trade-offs, avoiding unstable growth path and supporting our long-term ambitions. It will also require joint work with the private sector. And the most important thing is we need to work closely with the international community. I'm convinced that this regional dialogue will serve as an important step towards this fundamental common goal. Kazakhstan will continue close cooperation with the OECD in the framework of the global energy transition. And in conclusion, I would like to thank the host of the webinar for the opportunity to participate in this event. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Vice Minister. We now turn to Turkmenistan. Передам сейчас слово госпоже.
I will now turn the floor over to Ms. Galina Romanova, head of the State Finance and Economic Policy Department of the Ministry of Finance and Economy of Turkmenistan. Galina, the floor is yours, please. Good afternoon, Your Excellencies, dear Ms. Thompson. First of all, I would like to greet you warmly and to thank the OECD Secretariat for the opportunity to speak as part of the regional dialogue on the implementation of Paris Agreement on climate. For Turkmenistan, the implementation of the Paris Agreement and environmental issues are an absolute priorities. And these issues are especially critical in the context of implementation of SDGs, also in the context of the pandemic. The Turkmenistan adopted a number of strategic documents exactly 5 years ago. It signed the Paris Agreement. We have been engaged in efforts to address our climate-related issues. All the national and medium-term and long-term development programs enshrine the issues of improving environmental protection and environmental management, as well as development of the national economy with due account of the clean development mechanism. Turkmenistan shares the international community's concerns related to climate change. The national strategy of Turkmenistan on climate change and the National Forest Program are just a few of the documents adopted. The national strategy is one of the key documents adopted as, in the context of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which help Turkmenistan implement its commitments. The key objectives of the national strategy include improving hydrometeorological methods of observing weather and climate change, development and implementation of mitigation measures, and adaptation to climate change, as well as adaptation to climate change in all the priority sectors. Priority objectives are as follows: improving hydrometeorological observations, development and implementation of implementation and adaptation to climate change activities related to the fuel and energy, and abatement of reduction by 2030 by using water saving and energy efficient technologies, and as well as improving international cooperation in the context of climate change. Key areas for the implementation of Paris Agreement include agriculture, water management, healthcare, land resources, ecosystems, and forestry. And for each sector, we have adaptation actions in order to mitigate the impact of climate change based on the analysis and calculations. From 1955 to 2010, average air temperature went up and average precipitation decreased. It is due to the increase in the use of energy such as oil and gas, which increased greenhouse gas emissions. during an 18-year period from 1999 to 2017, total greenhouse gas emissions more than doubled. The largest share of emissions, 36%, comes from fugitive emissions. Population accounts for 23%. Energy sector accounts for 22%. Transport, 13%. Communal sector, 6%. And the rest of the sectors account for less than 1%. Given that Paris Agreement focuses on climate change, country has been developing and implementing adaptation and mitigation measures. Priority areas related to emissions reduction are energy efficiency, rational fuel management, and transition, a shift to renewable energy. Turkmenistan has been implementing measures to reduce harmful hazardous emissions into air. In order to reduce desertification, sand protection measures have been taken alongside railroads and highways, as well as watering pastures and construction of small wetlands near pastures in order to improve the environmental situation and to reduce a negative environmental impact. Efforts have been made to establish parks and forests. Stock of all the forests across Turkmenistan has been taken, and degraded forests in arid areas have been planted. 25 million seedlings have been planted last year. By the end of this year, another 30 million seedlings will be planted. In order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, Turkmenistan has been shifting to modern, clean, and energy-saving technologies in industry, in the manufacturing sector and transport, especially in the gas and energy sectors. We aim to achieve a stabilization of emissions by 2030. Our country is set to pursue low carbon development so that carbon emissions do not, so the temperature increase is not more than 2% by 2050 compared to the pre-industrial level. Together with the international institutions such as UNDP and GAF, we have been implementing a number of projects related to energy efficiency, water sources management, support for climate resilient development of arid areas, sustainable development of cities in Turkmenistan, integrated management of water resources prone to drought, as well as agricultural landscape, strengthening the capacity of Turkmenistan and supporting the development of country programs and regional actions in addressing climate change issues. This year already 3 other projects will be launched, such as conservation and sustainable management of land resources and high nature value ecosystems in the Aral Sea basin, integrating climate change risks into adaptation planning processes in Turkmenistan, and building resilience of agricultural communities. Turkmenistan has already made a number of important steps, such as implementing the state energy saving program for 2018 to 2024. On the 22nd of August 2020, the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer of the Vienna Convention was adopted. Thirdly, the program for the development of energy diplomacy of Turkmenistan for 2021 to 2025 has been under implementation. The national strategy for the development of renewable energy of Turkmenistan until 2030 has been ongoing, and the law on renewable energy was passed. Currently, a number of other instruments are being drafted. Issues related to such mitigation measures as the development of the national low carbon development programs, national stock taking of greenhouse gas emissions are being prepared, and the law on energy efficiency and energy conservation is being drafted. In the Caspian Sea, it is necessary to develop multilateral engagement and develop effective mechanisms in this area. In recent years alone, Turkmenistan developed a new Caspian program which covers all the countries, which has been submitted to all the countries in the region for approval and implementation, including with due account of pandemic-related risks. The RL issue has been addressed for the period until 2025. This will help improve the social and economic conditions for the population in the RLC basin, given the complexity and multifaceted nature of the climate change issues. Possible modalities of financing the issue has been explored, and Turkmenistan would like to thank the OECD for the opportunity to participate in this webinar. We are willing to consider and discuss the issues of green economy further. Thank you. Thank you very much. And now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Ermek Asherov, Senior Specialist, Strategic Planning Department of the Ministry of Economy and Finance of the Kyrgyz Republic. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you well. Thank you, dear colleagues, dear organizers of the webinar. Thank you for the opportunity to share the experience of the Central Asia countries. I would like to share with you key areas related to the green economy as part of the implementation of the governmental agreement at the Prime Minister's level. NDC, Nationally Determined Contribution, will be presented and it will be approved at the Prime Minister's Council. Next, with regards to the green economy, I would like to say that the Kyrgyz Republic has developed a 5-year program which was approved in 2019 until 2023, but unfortunately it had to be adjusted somewhat in the context of the global COVID-19 pandemic. The program covers 9 strategic areas: green economy, organic agriculture, green industry, sustainable tourism, low emission transport, and green cities. And it also covers cross-cutting areas such as sustainable financing, awareness raising of the population regarding green economy, and sustainable development as an integral element of green economy. For all the areas, we have made some progress, but with some we have made better progress and we have some accomplishments, while for some areas such as green cities, sustainable tourism, there are some challenges. I will zoom in on a low emission transport, including electric vehicles. We have already implemented some institutional elements such as zero customs duty for electric vehicles, no VAT, fixed price for electricity for electric vehicles at €1 per kilowatt hour. We also have a standard adopted for charging infrastructure. The Kyrgyz Republic already has about 250 to 300 electric vehicles. It is a drop in a bucket, but still it is a first swallow. Our objective is for electric vehicles to account for 3 to 5% until 2024 or 2026 in the total number of vehicles registered domestically. We currently have a program for development of the electric vehicle fleet, including shift of public transportation to electric buses as part of the low emission transport development. Now, about sustainable procurement, according to our analysis, in order to implement sustainability in the area of public procurement, we have been applying elements such as life cycle efficiency, environmental pressure, and socially oriented public procurement. Because in the past, our focus was on the lowest price for product. We also have been developing sustainable financing, green green and climate financing, with engagement of the financial sector, so that financing could be made available at lower discount rates for green projects. Next, we have been conducting an annual Green Economy Forum. It's a week-long forum. It starts in the regions. And it ends in the city of Bishkek. At the final stage, it covers energy, agriculture, manufacturing sector, transport, waste management, and green cities. That's it briefly regarding the development of green economy in the Kyrgyz Republic. Thank you. Thank you very much. And now I would like to give the floor to another colleague. I would like to give the floor to Mr. Zahar Mahmudov, Executive Director of CAREC, Central Asia Regional Environmental Center. Mr. Mahmudov, please. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I will probably comment in English too, regarding my vision.
Speakers, answering to the question earlier raised by Mr. Connor, whether net zero emission is possible in the Central Asian region. Well, we have heard quite impressive and interesting presentations from countries on their priorities and ambitious plans on reaching net zero emission. The Regional Environmental Center for Central Asia has recently launched a Central Asia Climate Information Platform that collects, structures, and visualizes public domain climate and climate relevant data and information to help stakeholders improve awareness, assessment, and decision making. The platform provides links to high quality data sets from global, regional, and local sources, analytical tools, and interfaces for data visualization and interpretation. So hence I have two questions. One is, are there any mechanisms envisioned to coordinate these processes of regional renewable energy emissions, to a platform or a coordination center that would, coordinate these activities among the countries of the region? That's one question. And then I would like to present, I'm not sure if I can share my screen now. Well, I can then send a link.
If you wish, we can share slides afterwards. But if you want to give us the quick overview of what you have, we can share the slides with participants afterwards, if that's agreeable.
Great.
Okay.
Great. So I wanted to share a bulletin that presents an environmental analytical information with articles comparing today's production of energy and its efficient utilization at the regional scale. Like, to a large extent, greenhouse gas emissions from the energy sector depend on the efficiency and the sources of generated power, and the ratio of which greatly varies among Central Asian countries. Speaking of today, while Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan generate most of their power at large hydropower plants, their current greenhouse gas emissions per unit of electricity produced are almost below global average. In contrast, Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan have remained primarily dependent on coal or gas for power generation, and their greenhouse gas emissions per unit of electricity produced are significantly higher than the global average. And this bulletin also brings in a comparative analysis on support mechanisms provided by the governments for renewable energy in Central Asian countries. So it is in trying to envisage what are the countries and compared to each other are going to achieve with their provided support mechanisms at the legal level. Today, my second question is, today a representative of Kyrgyz Republic spoke of their NDCs that should provide some information on their pledges to cut emissions. Are there any other strategic documents in the energy sector available that could feed more information into these kind of analytical making articles for the regional organizations that countries could also, make their pledges on reducing their gas emissions at the energy sector? Thank you very much, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. And we have a few minutes for question and answer. And I see quite a few questions that have popped up in the chat, so perhaps we will take them. I wonder if the hosts might not kind of bring our speakers back onto the screen. Perhaps Mr. Ashirov, if you can also put your camera back on so we can see you, we can kind of see all of the speakers. I know that I think, I'm not sure, Господин Narkulov, are you still with us? I believe he had another engagement to go to a few minutes ago, but we have First Vice Minister Salihzoda, we have Vice Minister Kvantyrov, we have Ms. Romanova, we have Mr. Ashirov, and just looking at the questions, I believe that Ms. Kvantyrov, you have already begun to respond to one of the questions. I don't know if you want to add anything briefly to what you've said to these questions in the chat.
Yeah, I can see a new question. I think, yes, it's addressed to me. I'll try to respond briefly in the chat. And if you have direct questions online, so I'm also hearing you. So let me just write an answer here, a short answer.
So we also have question, I see, вопрос, кто отвечает за разработку стратегии?
We also have a question about who's responsible for the development and promotion of climate neutrality in Kazakhstan.
The Ministry of Ecology is responsible for this document. And there was a question related to that it should be discussed with the society, and more time should be provided for discussion. Well, it's the question not to our ministry, it's mostly to the ecology ministry, so it's better to address it to them.
Perhaps we could come to a broader question, and I invite Galina Ravna, Господин Ashirov, Господин Salihzoda, anybody who wishes to come back on it. But there is a question, but a very important issue in this, which is public-private partnerships, государственно-частное партнерство в переходе к чистой нулевой экономике.
In the transition to net zero economy, would any of you like to share your country's experience?
Вице-министр Kvantyrov, пожалуйста.
Vice Minister Kvantyrov, please. Yes, thank you. The PPP issue is a critical one, and it is related to Mr. Wingerter's question. PPP has been implemented since 2005 for about 15 years now, But clearly, Kazakhstan is a big country, and there have been some challenges related to connectivity and so on. And of course, all the challenges should be addressed in a phased manner. The PPP tool is one of the most attractive ones at the moment because it helps to reduce the burden on the budget, at least during the planning phase. But it involves some obligations at a later stage. The tool has not yet been perfected. We have implemented it successfully in preschool education. We are implementing it now in school education. And the tool should be applied not only as some costly loan where a private sector builds some costly school. It should have some content and substance to it. And it should concern major investment projects, including in the area of renewable energy. It is now being incorporated in our doctrine. Some targets have been incorporated in the long-term program. The issue should be discussed closely with the Ministry of Economy. We do acknowledge that there are some issues related to the PPP tool. There is no ideal tool, and we should probably engage the international practices, and we will apply best practices. We are always open for cooperation. You can submit any proposal, and we will collect all the proposals. Any initiative should also be discussed with the civil society. All good ideas should be discussed and implemented. And I can also see that Mr. Salihzoda raised his hand. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Tajikistan was one of the first Central Asia countries which drafted the law on public-private partnership. And the State Investment and State Property Committee now includes the State Institution for PPPs, which deals with the development of public-private partnership projects. We have already accumulated some experience in this area. 4 large projects have been implemented in the area, including in the energy sector. In transport, and now 8 more projects are in the pipeline in the public-private partnership sector. They will cover education, healthcare, and renewable energy. I have also noted a question about how investment could be mobilized to develop green energy and green economy. As a result of greenhouse gas emissions and climate change, glaciers have been melting on a constant basis now. More than 1,000 glaciers have already melted in Tajikistan, which can have global consequences. So it has been proposed to set up the Glacier Conservation Fund, which will deal with mobilizing the funds from development partners in order to identify and develop glacier conservation actions. various projects have been implemented regionally in order to develop green economy, including establishment of the Central Asia United Grid. CASA 1000 is another major project under implementation, which aims to connect Central Asia and South Asia. Along with the implementation of investment projects to develop green energy, the Green Economy Promotion Investment Fund could also be established in Central Asia. And this will require coordination and collaboration of all the countries. We have to move to our next item. Well, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Romanova, if you would like to add, as well as to Mr. Asher. Yes, of course. Thank you very much, Mr. Thompson. I would like to say just a couple of words about public-private partnerships in Turkmenistan. We already have a draft law on public-private partnerships, which has already been discussed by ministries and agencies. It is currently at the Parliament of Turkmenistan, and it will give additional impetus to the cooperation between public and private sectors. The green economy area includes some elements involving private sector, including private entrepreneurs and small and medium enterprises in the manufacturing sector, regarding the development and establishment of production. They are encouraged to use energy conservation and energy efficient technologies, treatment plants, and implementation of those technologies is monitored. The issue of financing for all these activities, which has been raised by colleagues, has been addressed with the assistance of the private sector, especially for manufacturing industries. And green economy is incorporated, for example, by way of planting forest stands and seedlings in urban and rural areas. And the legal framework, which will be adopted in the form of this draft law, will give momentum to the development of PPPs in the area of resource conservation. Thank you. Mr. Asherov, would you like to add? We haven't had many projects related to PPPs. We've had some in the area of healthcare and education. One of the recent PPP-based projects is the electric vehicle fleet. It is an interesting project, a new business idea, which is currently under consideration. We view the development of low-emission transport in the form of EVs. Paradoxically, we have one of the lowest electricity prices, and development of EVs and increasing the EV fleet is we view this as a way of raising electricity prices. There are 250 small and medium rivers with sufficient capacity, which is a way to develop small and medium energy sector.
The importance of international cooperation in these matters. Central Asia will make this transition together if it's going to make this transition successfully and in a way that brings prosperity to the region. And so it's appropriate that we move from hearing these excellent and I think very honest presentations from the countries to hear from international partners in our second session. I begin by inviting first Ms. Yasmin Siddiqui, the Director for Environment, Natural Resources and Agriculture Division in the Central and West Asia Department of the Asian Development Bank. Please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thompson. Ladies and gentlemen, eminent guests and speakers, good afternoon to you or good evening. Firstly, I would like to thank the OECD for giving ADB this opportunity to contribute to this very important and timely dialogue. I'm also thankful to the previous speakers for their insightful remarks. On behalf of ADB, I have three broad areas to share upon. Firstly, ADB's Strategy 2030 and its climate targets. The Central and West Asia region, which for ADB covers 10 countries from Pakistan through the Central Asian region, all the way to the Southern Caucasus region, is extremely vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And these impacts are already evident. Besides its vulnerability, many of these countries have emission-intensive economies. Climate change is integral to ADB's work, and we are very much committed to supporting our developing member countries in transitioning to low carbon and climate resilient economies. ADB continues to scale up its operations to support its developing members more effectively and in meeting those commitments under the Paris Agreement. This is through strategic advice, innovative financing, disseminating knowledge, and building partnerships. ADB underscores its commitment through its Strategy 2030 by setting very ambitious targets on climate change. By 2030, ADB will ensure that 75% of its committed operations will be supporting climate change mitigation and adaptation. And further, we intend to deliver $80 billion worth of climate financing from our own resources cumulatively from 2019 to 2030. ADB is also planning to ramp up investments in climate change adaptation and resilience with cumulative financing of $9 billion from 2019 to 2024. In addition, and importantly, ADB is working jointly with other multilateral development banks. This is to align its operations to the goals of the Paris Agreement by committing to a common alignment approach in supporting developing member countries. With this, we can achieve low greenhouse gas emissions and climate resilient development pathways. ADB will achieve full alignment of its sovereign operations by the 1st of July 2023. Alignment of its non-sovereign operations will reach 85% by the 1st of July 2023 and 100% by the 1st of July 2025. Secondly, in terms of ADB's policy support, for emission-intensive economies, there will be considerable challenges ahead, and this is particularly when they transition to a low-carbon development path. Upstream support will be essential to create the enabling framework to facilitate these countries in their transformation and to encourage climate finance flows to drive private sector investments. ADB works at addressing these. It supports all aspects of climate policy and development, including the nationally determined contributions, just transition, and green recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as low emission and climate resilient development long-term strategies, or LTS. Currently, there are 3 developing member countries which are supported by ADB, and they've submitted their LTS to the UNFCCC. Other countries are also developing their LTS or long-term strategies, and several developing member countries have come forward with commitments to reach net zero or carbon neutrality. These are all very positive results to date. The LTS can guide the development of climate-informed project pipelines of each government. It can also provide greater clarity on the effective application of the MDB's instruments. For example, technical assistance, investment loans, and importantly, and I'd like to stress that point, knowledge development support, which is very crucial in addition to investment. The LTS can also guide short and medium-term decision-making, including formulation of more ambitious NDCs. In the Central and West Asia region, ADB is supporting 5 developing member countries with various aspects of NDC implementation under its NDC Advance facility. This is a dedicated technical assistance platform to support NDC preparation. It also includes support for aligning COVID-19 recovery plans with the NDCs. And we're also exploring opportunities to support the development of the institutional structure and approach frameworks for developing LTS. Thirdly, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to share an example of a project by ADB. This is linked to providing climate policy support for developing member countries. And ADB, as I mentioned earlier, is integrating upstream climate assessments to inform the development of its country partnership strategies and project pipelines. Now, these are developed jointly with the governments that we're working with. A good example in supporting the race to net zero emissions is in Uzbekistan. This is for the Central Asia Regional Economic Cooperation Corridor 2, PAP Namangan Andhijan Railway Electrification Project. It aims to electrify railway tracks linking major cities in the Fergana Valley with Tashkent. It will facilitate efficient and low emission freight and passenger train services, and also promote the socioeconomic development of the Fergana Valley. As electrification projects will only contribute to zero emission targets when the energy mix is also decarbonized, ADB is also working with the government of Uzbekistan and the private sector to enable investments in the renewable energy sector. Ladies and gentlemen, ADB remains fully committed to supporting its developing member countries in this transition to low carbon and resilient economies. I thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. And now I want to invite Mr. Yerlan Ramazanov, Senior Banker in Energy Eurasia, Middle East and Africa of the EBRD.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thompson, for giving the floor. And I would like to thank OECD for inviting us and having me today at this really important roundtable and discussion with the key stakeholders involved. And I think that it's really timely. And I'm just joining the speech made earlier by colleagues from the authorities and ADB. So let me also start my short speech and intervention on EBRD's involvement and how do we support and how we would like to continue working with the governments of Central Asia. And I'd like to use this opportunity to thank our colleagues from governments who have joined us today for the continuous support and close cooperation which we have in these countries, in each and every country in the region. So let me start saying that in accordance with the bank strategy, we do support carbon neutrality in the region and among all the countries of operation of the bank. And we, as the bank, we have in our midterm policy, we set 3 key focal points for us for the development. And these are green, inclusive, and digital. And I think that all of these 3, they perfectly fit into the low carbon development of the world and Central Asia region in particular, because all of these, they go hand in hand in terms of how we want to achieve carbon neutrality, whether it is by 2050 or 2060, as it was declared in Kazakhstan, for example, in the region. I'd like to say that in EBRD, shareholders of EBRD, they just approved that as of end of next year, 100% of banks' operations should be aligned with the goals of Paris Agreement. And it is said that we should achieve 50% finance of all EBRD financing should be invested in green and sustainable projects. And I think that this is really important in terms of what we want to do and how I think that we want to achieve the target of carbon neutrality and achievement of the goals of Paris Agreement. And here, EBRD, as the bank, it not only invests in projects, but also it supports the government, the companies, via the associated policy dialogue and the technical cooperation. And here, coming back to the region, I think that EBRD is the pioneer in the region in the renewable sector. We've in Kazakhstan, we are the largest investor in the renewable sector, financing approximately half of installed renewable capacity in the country. In Uzbekistan, we provided financing to all projects, renewable projects which reached the financial close stage. And I think that it's really important that in Central Asia, we have the exceptional resource potential for development of renewables, which could be the key part of any low carbon development strategy of any country of the region. I think that we also have a strong and pragmatic political will of all countries to achieve low emissions development in future, and everyone understands that this is where everyone wants to be and want to be a part of this. But at the same time, it's not without any challenges. And in terms of the challenges, well, for example, if we turn to renewables, we all see and understand that, for example, its intermittent nature and requirement to balance and requirement to develop balancing solutions, both on the demand side and supply side, developing the balancing capacity. But at the same time, equally, it goes with the current reliance on aged power generation sources in the countries. I think that at the moment in the region, EBRD has financed more than 1.3 gigawatts of renewable capacity, investing more than $800 million across 22 projects. And now let me turn to a couple of examples, and I would like to say a few words about our experience in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. And I think that in Kazakhstan, we had quite a detailed discussion yesterday at the roundtable discussing the low emissions development strategy of Kazakhstan, which is currently being developed, and we hope that it will be approved by the end of the year by the president and by the government. And I think that it's really important what's the work which is ongoing, and we as the bank will participate at supporting, providing our comments to the authors of the strategy in Kazakhstan. At the same time, we are working on development and supporting the government and the Ministry of Ecology, Geology and Natural Resources in developing the carbon trading system in Kazakhstan. We are also working with colleagues from USA who actually participated yesterday to the roundtable. We support together the Ministry of Energy on development of low carbon pathway for the power sector, working together with the Ministry of Energy. And I think that it's really important that this low emissions development strategy, it focuses not only on the supply side, but also on the demand side. And we, from our side, I think that it's also important to know that we as the bank, we understand that the role, the kind of, the demand for balancing capacity in Kazakhstan due to the Soviet times kind of, history, when Kazakhstan has always been providing the base load, and Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, they were providing the balancing capacity. So in Kazakhstan, we understand that country needs to probably build new gas balancing capacity. But at the same time, we from our side, from EBRD, we think that any such project, it should be developed in line with the goals of Paris Agreement, in line with the NDCs, this low emissions development strategy, and ensure low lock-in risk and positive results of cost-benefit analysis, which would include cost of carbon and alternative low-carbon solutions. I see that I don't have any much time, but I do want to say that we are quite active in Uzbekistan, and here we respect what the government is doing, and I just want to know that, and also the first Vice Minister also mentioned on that one that we supported the auctions. And last week, the results of the first 100 megawatt out of the 1 gigawatt program was announced, and Aqua Power won it, giving 2.57 US cents per kilowatt hour, which is record low for the region. So I'd like to say that we really should work together to achieve. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sorry to be rushing you, but we're short of time with several speakers to go. Thank you so much, and I pass directly to Mr. Patrick Meyer, Energy Team Leader for the Economic Development Office for Central Asia of USAID.
Yes, thank you very much. I hope that you can see my slides as well.
Yeah, very well.
Great.
Carry on.
Thank you, everyone. Today, I'll be focusing on USAID's energy sector programming and our overall contribution to meeting Central Asia's low carbon strategies. I'm based in our regional mission, which is in Almaty, and we implement in all 5 Central Asian countries. I just have a few slides that should help visualize our work. As we look forward over the next 10 years, we have a strategic vision. We see today that the energy sector is mostly dominated by government-owned companies, derives a lot of its power from oil and gas, and is very vulnerable to climate change. So looking forward 10 years, we're aiming to create a market that is transparent, has diverse private sector participation, uses a large amount of diverse resources, and is much cleaner than what we see today. Just some top line budget items. USAID has invested about $130 million in energy sector assistance from 2015 to 2025. And looking just at the activities that we're implementing now, it's about $89 million. So from a aid agency perspective, this is quite a large portfolio for this sector. One of the primary pieces of that portfolio is our Power Central Asia activity, which we launched in October of last year. So it has these 3 overarching pillars, looking at market liberalization reforms, clean energy, and increasing regional connectivity. So for example, working with the national energy strategies, modernizing utilities, making renewable energy and part of regional planning, and building that regional electricity market. I'll touch base on some specific activities a bit later under that. But to help you conceptualize kind of our overall long-term vision, let me talk about CARIM, the Central Asia Regional Electricity Market. So this is a vision for a modern, efficient regional market that has optimized pricing, increased trade and revenue, uses a wide array of resources, and has improved governance and transparency. And USAID is working with a huge variety of actors from, of course, the Central Asia governments that are providing that leadership, but the private sector, IFIs are providing financing, and the US government, both through our State Department and through USAID, are applying that expertise and regulatory and economic reforms. So we view CARIM as a sort of enabler for increasing renewable energy generation. And we couple that with targeted assistance, for example, assisting with the renewable energy auctions in Kazakhstan between 2018 and 2020. These renewable energy auctions resulted in 57 projects totaling over 1,000 megawatts. And the most important thing being that we saw from 2018 to 2020, 57 to 22% decrease in the ceiling prices, depending on the energy resource, as you see there. And we've also done some analysis on the CO2 emissions and looking at about a 4% reduction of CO2 emissions from power sector in Kazakhstan, just as a result of those projects. And another example of the sort of targeted assistance that we do is here in Tajikistan. Last year, we partnered with the government of Tajikistan and with Premier Energy to assist building a 200 kilowatt solar plant with battery storage. And this is a pretty unique project because it's at a very high elevation at 3,600 meters, very remote. And really Premier Energy needed a little bit of funding and technical expertise to set this project kind of over that finish line. And so we were able to contribute. The daytime electricity for those villages increased by about 50% as a result of this. And now we're actually scoping that out to a megawatt. And CASA 1000 was already mentioned briefly earlier. CASA 1000 is a large multi-donor project aiming to bring that summertime hydropower from Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan to Pakistan through Afghanistan. And USAID plays a unique role in that we fund the CASA 1000 Secretariat. The Secretariat is this sort of convening body that gives the four countries a safe space where they can negotiate technical and financial terms like the account bank or overcome challenges like handing over the construction sites to the construction companies. And as of today, we actually have construction on all 10 of the tenders, which means that it's progressing in all countries. And really, lastly, I just wanted to mention some new developments that are emerging, as we speak. Last month in August, we signed a MOU with Samruk Energy, which is responsible for about 30% of Kazakhstan's energy production. And we'll be working with them to design their low carbon transition plan as to how Samruk Energy can really play that leadership role in meeting Kazakhstan's goals. And then earlier, also mentioned the partnership with EBRD, modeling those low carbon pathways for Kazakhstan's entire power sector, giving Kazakhstan these sort of actionable development pathways. And one of those pathways being that very clean one that would actually result in carbon neutrality by 2060. And lastly, we are entering a bunch of new partnerships with universities. And especially with the German Kazakh University, which is you may be interested to know, just this week, launched a new master's degree program in renewable energy here based in Almaty. And they have students from all 5 Central Asian countries, and USAID is providing scholarships for 6 students. We're also working with the Almaty University of Power Engineering, as you see there. So that's like a really high level, really quick overview of the work that we're doing. I'm happy to answer questions or take the conversation offline, but thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Sorry, I have to rush a little bit and pass straight away to former OECD colleague, Mr. Klaus Hachmeier, who's left the OECD and is now Senior Director of Government Affairs, Middle East and Eastern Europe, Russia and CIS at Siemens Energy. Klaus. You have to.
Thank you very much, dear Bill. And should I open my presentation? There we are. Thank you very much. Okay. Well, I'm happy to speak here for 2 reasons. The first one, this is a welcome back, as I was a member of the OECD Eurasia team some years ago. And secondly, this topic is very important, and I'm happy to share some of the views of the private sector with you. So let's move to the next slide. Siemens Energy is a relatively new company. It's a large spin-off of Siemens AG, and considers itself as a world leader in energy. So 1/6 of all electricity generation comes from our technology and has our footprint in it. We're present in 90 countries. We have large offices also in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, and I'm also very happy to say that with both countries, we have MOUs to drive the decarbonization agenda with our products, technologies, and solutions. Let's move on to the next slide. That's just a brief overview of our portfolio. I think some years ago, people used to speak of electricity. Now we're speaking of energy. This is because the energy transition, as we are facing it, requires a cross-sectoral approach. By this, I mean we see increasing electrification of other sectors, such as the industry, transport. We're also seeing sector coupling, and a big question will also be on how to bring heat, electrification into heat, etc. So this approach is really new, and our portfolio is reflecting that. We are working on traditional technologies. We're working on new technologies, especially the hydrogen sector, and we have a large portfolio of renewable energies. And we are increasingly looking as a system provider also at partnerships to fill in gaps in other technologies, e.g. solar technologies, to combine this with our other solutions to serve the demand. Next slide, please. I just want to remind you or mention briefly that it's not only companies and international development banks that have climate goals, but also all larger companies have such goals. Our own goal is to have 100% of our electricity consumption green by 2023. That's in 2 years, and become climate neutral also in a foreseeable number of years. We are also evaluating in our sustainability reporting on how we are in alignment with sustainable development goals. Again, this is a reflection of a broader trend in the industry, where we as an industry also see, I would say, increasing pressure also from the side of finance, from our investment, but also from our own employees to become climate neutral and climate friendly ourselves. And this is also, I think, a very strong point in this debate, because we are actually also committed through these factors to decarbonization. So move on to the next slide. This is just an overview of our decarbonization agenda. Of course, I'm not going through all of these technologies. I just want to mention maybe 2 points. Number one, we are heavily investing in new technologies and carbon-friendly technologies to the amount of $1 billion every year goes into research and development. And through our large portfolio in the energy field, we are in a unique position, I should say, to develop solutions where we are combining, I would say, upgrade of existing technologies and power plants or energy facilities, so-called low-hanging fruits of decarbonization, but also look more at the medium and longer-term requirements if it comes to decarbonization of the energy systems. And we are, of course, also having a strong footprint in digitalization, other new technologies, etc., which are, I would say, these are cross-vertical elements of this chart. Next slide, please. Just to show how we are partnering and cooperating with governments all over the globe. If we take the left example of Egypt, in Egypt, we have a long-standing contact and partnership with the government of Egypt. We helped Egypt through construction of large power plants, gas-fired power plants at that time, to become an export of energy within 2 years or 3 years' time, so very quickly. In the meantime, our portfolio, we have constructed wind farms in Egypt, and presently we are working strong on hydrogen production in Egypt with a view of exporting green, clean hydrogen to Europe. Next slide, please.
I have to rush you here, Klaus.
Yes, 2 slides. This is just an example of what we do to Uzbekistan. So we are developing these tailor-made roadmaps with products which we are proposing. And final slide then.
And we will share these slides afterwards as well, so
yes,
people can look at the detail.
Okay, just 3 quick points. So number one, cooperation with development banks, institutions, very important for us, also in Central Asia. We are, of course, participating in open tenders, but we're also developing projects for which we seek financing through the so-called private sector finance windows of these institutions, and we would like to continue to that and deepen our cooperation. A second point, I mean, I do not need to say that a comprehensive climate strategy with a structural policy agenda is very important for us, because this is really, I would say, the seed ground to develop our projects. And third, final point, asking about foreign direct investment and other spillovers, innovation, technology transfer, etc. We are doing that. Of course, we're doing that from a business perspective, but we've seen a great trend towards partnering also with institutions such as German GIZ, possibly also USAID and others, to develop, for example, technology centers or university courses, etc. So there's great scope of cooperation and therefore, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Sorry, I have to rush things a bit, but we are up against the clock. Thank you very much. Now, my OECD colleague, Jean-François Langelet, will briefly present our new project, which he is coordinating on sustainable infrastructure for low carbon resilient development in Central and Southeast Asia, which is to begin in early October, just days from now. Jean-François, please.
Maybe before we we move to the project, we could invite Julien Perez.
I beg your pardon. I beg your pardon. You are absolutely right. I beg your pardon. I skipped, and it's on my agenda here. I'm sorry. Thank you. So we have from the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative, Mr. Julien Perez.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And
my apologies.
No problem at all. Don't worry, William. And I'll try to make it quick and short. So if you can pull up yeah, wonderful. So if you can go to the next slide, I'm just going to quickly introduce what OGCI is. So we're gathering 12 companies today, and it's a CEO-led initiative that aims to be additional. So we focus our efforts on trying to scale up the low carbon solutions that are difficult to be scaled up by individual companies, and so by bringing the force of the coalition. So and the objective of the OGCI is to bring the oil and gas industry on a low carbon pathway. So by definition, if you focus on the hard to scale up, we generally focus on some of the solutions that you can see on the slide here. One being the CCUS, and it's going to be the main topic of my presentation. But another topic that I just want to quickly touch, and then I'm happy to take any further offline question on that, is that we are also dedicated a lot of effort and resources on tackling the methane issue related to oil and gas production. And to give you an example, we are just launching a satellite data acquisition in some countries. We are starting with Iraq, but we are also considering to do that in Turkmenistan. And the data would be shared with the local players as well, with the governments to help in sorting those. Also, I wanted to highlight the fact that we have a number of partnerships with some of the colleagues that I've spoken before, particularly with the ADB, but also with the World Bank or the Clean Energy Ministerial. And so we really value this public-private partnership. And the final point of OGCI to let you know is that we have also an investment fund, which is a 1 billion fund that is taking equity share into technologies that then we scale up across the various segments of the energy economy. So if you move on to the next slide, I'm going to zoom on a CCUS in more specifically. We've just launched and finalized actually work where we have covered 52 countries around the world by into an algorithm where we have injected information about the location of the source of emission, the existence of a pipeline, as well as the location of the storage capacity. And the idea was for us to design what could look like the optimum of the economic optimum for a hub, an industrial hub, to be decarbonized. And I'm going to share some results that we got later on the Kazakhstan case. So if you move on to the next slide. Actually, this research allowed us to cover 52 countries. We have identified more than 200 hubs representing roughly 6 gigatons of CO2 emission per year that could be decarbonized with CCUS projects at a cost that is below $200. But among those 200 hubs, there are 91 that could be decarbonized at less than $100. Now, if I make a zoom on Central Asia, and we've covered 2 countries mainly, Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan so far, there is 4 hubs representing roughly 100 million tons per year that could be decarbonized with this type of cost, and including 61 that could be decarbonized at a cost less than $100 per tons of CO2. So this of course is a desktop study and require some deep dive, and this is the next stage for us, is to leverage on the presence of our member companies in those countries to investigate much deeper some of the most promising hubs that we have identified. So if you move on to the next slide, it's just a quick overview of the different countries and how we have ranked them versus different type of parameters. So the y-axis is about the techno-economic feasibility, so the number of and the size of the different hub that we have identified and the cost associated with them. And the x-axis is about what we call the CCUS environment score, i.e. the CCUS regulatory and policy environment. If you click just one time, it's going to make appear a box. Yeah, thanks. The Kazakhstan appear to be quite interesting because the overall environment for CCUS in Kazakhstan is relatively favorable, with an operating cap and trade system, large oil and gas sector, and a relatively stable geopolitical context. And the overall abatement costs in Kazakhstan are average, mainly driven by the long distance of the oil and gas storage option. So if you move on, I'm going to make a deeper zoom on Kazakhstan now. And here you can see that we have identified 3 hubs actually that could be decarbonized. 2 of them comes with a cost that we estimate to be below $100 per ton. The biggest hub is located in the region of Nur Sultan, and this industrial clusters have large emissions stemming mainly from power generation, steel, aluminium, and cement production. And the distance to the closest suitable storage option means that a very large share of emission, approximately 54 million tons per year, needs to be captured to achieve sufficient scale to drive down transport costs. However, this implies that a sizable infrastructure investment is required to initiate CCUS development in the cluster, which could be a barrier, of course, that needs to be considered. Then we have identified also 2 other hubs. I'm not going to describe, just conscious of the time, but I'm happy to cover those in a follow-up conversation. If you move on to again, we've done a similar exercise on Azerbaijan, and similarly, I'm happy to cover those.
Okay.
Just very quickly to let you know that beyond identifying those options, we have also the capacity to then work hand in hand with the players, so the emitters as well as the governments, and we have 8 hubs already that we are quite active in. And the final point that I just wanted to highlight is that if you want to get an access on, if you click on the next slide, please. We have put on our website a storage resource database, so you can get an access to that and click on the different storage resource capacity. And I'm not going to describe the last slide because I know it's going to be shared, but it's few ideas on how to accelerate the CCUS agenda in the region. So thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that and for your patience. Always requires a certain patience to be the very last one up in such a panel, but it's been an excellent and rich discussion. Before we close, I want to pass the floor to Jean-Francois, as I mentioned, to describe the project we will kick off next month.
Thank you, Bill. So indeed, we are launching this new project on sustainable infrastructure in Central Asia to really take on board a lot of what we heard and also operationalize the transition to net zero by focusing on sustainable infrastructure. What we really want to do is build on the seeds that we planted today and have this community of expert practitioner, decision maker in sustainable infrastructure across the whole project life cycle, from the strategic planning, investment, project preparation phase, financing, implementation, and delivery. So we will be kicking off activities in mid-October at the regional level with a series of regional dialogue for all the stakeholders to collaborate, but as well will be in a carefully selected country, conducting country level work on several elements. If you move to the next slide, one of them will be building on what we heard on the importance to enhance analytical and institutional capacity for upstream planning. We will be providing governments in the region with policy reviews, assessment, methodology, and more importantly, capacity development programs to better align the strategic infrastructure plans and processes and institutions with project level assessment in light of the low carbon and resilience objectives. We will do that by deploying some foresight techniques, by mobilizing some good practices on modeling, in particular to support the design and implementation of low emission development strategy we've talked a lot today. Secondly, we would like to work on the improvement of the policy framework by focusing on 3 infrastructure systems in energy, transport, and industry sector, and of course, in close consultation with you and other development partners. A lot of them are participating in this call, and thank you very much already for your commitment. In terms of specific activities, what we want to do is to focus on, in the energy sector, on accompanying the transition out from fossil fuel subsidies, particularly in keeping in mind the just transition agenda that Kumi was referring to. And we will draw a lot on the expertise of our partner, the International Institute for Sustainable Development. On transport, we will leverage the expertise of our sister organization, International Transport Forum, by working at a national level on developing roadmap for resilient and decarbonized transport, but as well on modeling at a regional level connectivity, trade flow connectivity, and the implied emission pattern, and providing options and building capacity around those lines. And the third area is around the decarbonization of energy intensive industry, where we will support in cement, in non-ferrous metallurgy, the development of a transition roadmap and decarbonization strategies. And thirdly, we will support on the mainstreaming of in the area of sustainable finance and due diligence practices. We will support the mainstreaming of OECD responsible business conduct principles, particularly with hopefully professional association and in business sectors such as in the construction and in the transport sector. And finally, we would like to engage with particularly national banks to mobilize the financial system to encourage the uptake of sustainable infrastructure projects. And finally, we will continue hopefully this series of regional policy dialogue on some of the topics that have been mentioned on investing in skills and innovation, and as well on improving the governance of SOEs and the role that those SOEs can have to crowd in the private sector. So I'll stop here. As you can see, it's quite an ambitious project. It's a lot about capacity building. It's a lot about being demand driven. We've started the consultation process with our local partners, but we're looking forward to engage further with all of you. Thank you again.
Thank you, Jean-François. Thank you, Jean-François. Just very few concluding remarks first about some things that are upcoming. The Green Action Task Force, which is the OECD initiative focused on environmental protection in Eastern Europe, South Caucasus, and Central Asia, will be meeting virtually on the 12th and 13th of October. The OECD Eurasia Competitiveness Program will be hosting a series of events in the context of the OECD Eurasia Competitiveness Roundtable in late November as well. So we have plenty coming up over the next couple of months. And I want to highlight how much we've heard today refers to the kind of interlinkages between different sectors, transport, energy, and industry, linked to sustainable infrastructure plans. And we've also considered sectors such as water, which has come up several times, and it is clearly the critical concern in Central Asia. And I just want to alert you that the OECD is planning further work on this in 2021 and 22. We're well aware of it, looking at opportunities for regional cooperation around the energy, water, land use nexus. And we look forward to updating all of you as this process unfolds. Finally, a few words of thanks. First of all, thanks to our outstanding speakers who have provided us with terrific content, given of their time and expertise. I thank all of you for your attention and participation and listening, and for the many excellent questions and comments you've put up in the chat. I do also want to thank Germany again for making this work on infrastructure possible. We're very excited about that. And finally, two more personal words of thanks, first towards all the members of the OECD team involved in this event, whom you have neither seen nor heard today, because there are a whole lot of people working behind the scenes, managing slides, managing registration, operating Zoom, and so on. We couldn't do this without them, and they do, as always. They've done an excellent job. And last of all, I hope you will all join me in thanking the individual who has probably worked harder than anyone else today, and that is our outstanding interpreter, Natalia Chumachenko, who's done a tremendous job and who I suspect is going to need a very large
потрясающе сегодня поработала и которая сейчас, вероятно, очень хочет пить после 2 часов нашего напряженного обмена мнениями. Я благодарю вас всех, я желаю вам приятного дня.